Here's what's funny in my brain. I am making an assumption that this is the right one. If I've hyped this up and then it's not, then we're gonna be like, all right, stop recording. Let's just chat for a minute.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I didn't start it at all in order to
sure.
establish that it was. So
Hmm.
I think in my brain, I thought, well, when Sunstone Mormon History finally puts out their episode where they talk about our ancestors, which was a product of me emailing Brian Buchanan asking him for research advice. And that's how all of that started. But I was asking for research advice because we were going to do this podcast. So it just happened. It wasn't something that I planned or something that they had planned. It just so happened I emailed them and shared this family story and said, "Hey, I know you guys have talked about this. Is there any way that you can kind of point me where to look?"
Hmm.
Brian Buchanan his interest was so piqued
Hmm.
that when he got back to me, he said, "Would it be okay if I researched this for you and then we talk about it on our podcast?" And I was like, "Absolutely, that's totally fine." So I've been waiting, and it has been a couple months, which, he told me it probably would, but it has been a couple months, and they finally posted it. And so what you and I are going to do at this point is we are going to listen to it and respond in real time. The other thing I wanted to say is, oh, before we jump into this, why don't we do a quick recap of what
Hmm.
it is that is the root of our interest, the reason
Hmm.
why we're even doing this. And so
Hmm.
I'll just tell my story and then you jump in and fill in the gaps if I'm forgetting any important information. I'm assuming you just listened to that episode
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
Okay. So forever ago, when Nate and I were talking about doing this, I was doing research about the Robinson family. I had not yet really, we hadn't started recording yet, but I
Hmm.
was doing research and I discovered, and when I say discovered, this is not my original research, and I always want to make that clear that I'm not claiming to have discovered something that nobody else discovered.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm saying from a personal point of view, as a descendant of Mormonism, being on the church's genealogical website, Family Search, that when I was clicking on my ancestors, these Robinson ancestors, when I was a believing Mormon, I read about a lot of my ancestors, and I did do some original research on some of the other ancestors in our family, but it just so happened that I had never really dug into this family. So, of course, the first place you go is a place where a lot of other people have already posted information. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel, right? There's no
Yeah.
reason to do the work that other people have already done, unless you're a scholar and you need to verify things. But I'm just trying to learn about my family. So I was reading through things on Family Search that had been posted underneath my ancestors by other people, distant relatives and other genealogists and so forth. And there was a beautifully written history by one of our distant relatives, Dennis Drake, and he wrote a very thorough history of Richard Smith Robinson. And in there, he talks about Mary Smith, Richard's mother, and he reveals, because it sounds like the way he wrote it, it sounds like in his family and some of the other Robinson families, this had been something that was hidden. It was like he felt really hesitant, but he felt really strongly that he wanted to share this. He just said it. Mary Smith took her own life, which had not been the family story. The family story had been that she had died in childbirth. And then to verify this information that he was putting out there, he also included the newspaper clipping from the Nauvoo Neighbor. At that time, it was posted in the Nauvoo Neighbor. Let me take a step back. Mary Smith took her own life on September 1st, 1845. I believe her body was discovered on September 2nd, the next morning. And then this newspaper clipping from the Nauvoo Neighbor was dated September 3rd. So it is right from that very time that this was posted in the newspaper, and they specifically say that the manner in which she took her life was that she slit her throat with a razor. When I read that, and then you and I later talked about it and agreed, it contradicted everything that I knew about Mary Smith. No, she did not come from money. She was not an aristocrat. She was from a working class family, but she had at least enough education to be hired as a governess for, if not the wealthiest man in England, one of the wealthiest men in England. And what some people say is that no, 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 he was the wealthiest man in England. And in fact, he was the wealthiest man in all of Europe.
Hmm.
I don't know factually how much of that aligns. All we know is that at the very least, he was one of the wealthiest men in England. And, this we only have one sketch of her, but she's darling, right? Like she's in nice clothing, beautiful curls around her face and this gorgeous hat, and she looks like a lady. And
Yeah.
that is who she was. And she married a man who was able to pull himself out of the poverty of his working class family, Edward Robinson. He was very successful in England. He apparently was the first railroad conductor in the world, and he had some prestige because of that.
Mm.
He worked for this company that was using this brand new technology of the railroad. And when they moved to Nauvoo, they had money.
Mm.
And they bought 35 acres of land on the east side of Nauvoo, and they built this beautiful two-story brick home. They were landed.
Mm.
They had money and they had land, and this is a woman. And let me actually make sure I share this detail. People have always throughout history at times taken their own lives for a variety of reasons, and it is usually from depression, despondency,
Mm.
hopelessness, all of those things.
Mm.
And the number, well, I don't know the order, but the three most common ways in the Victorian era for women to take their life was jumping from a high place, poison, and drowning. And Mary Smith Robinson lived right on the Mississippi River. You and I grew up not far from the Mississippi River. We know personally how powerful that river is,
Yeah.
how wide
Mhm.
that river is. If there are those listening that have only lived in Utah and maybe haven't ventured to that place, do not imagine a river in Utah when we're
Yeah.
talking about the Mississippi
Yeah.
River.
Yeah.
It is vast, it is powerful, it is strong,
Yeah.
it is wide, it is all of those things. And all she would have had to do is literally
Just
wade
walk
out,
into the river.
walk into the river,
Yeah.
and let the river do what it does. It
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
it would have been painless.
Yeah.
But according to the newspaper article, she slit her throat with a razor.
Hmm.
And it feels so unlikely, so unlike
Yeah.
her. So of course, as I'm reading this several months ago for the first time, I'm thoroughly confused. I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. I even have a dialogue with our brother-in-law, who is a medical examiner and has done autopsies on thousands of passed away people.
Mm.
And his response is, that's not normal. That's not a
Yeah.
normal thing that
Yeah.
most women do,
Hmm.
even today, to say the least about back then. And I just was stunned.
Hmm.
I was at a loss. And as I continued to kind of think about it, and I am such a huge fan of the Sunstone Mormon History podcast, I knew that I had heard things on that podcast and other things that Lindsay Hansen Park had said and been involved in, and other interviews I'd heard with her and presentations that she'd given. I had heard her specifically her say, when we're talking about, well, and I better say this, there's doctrine in one of the Mormon scriptures, which is the Doctrine and Covenants. Well, there's a place where the wife of the prophet, so the prophet was Joseph Smith, Emma Smith is his wife. He was claiming that he had been commanded to practice polygamy. Of course, his wife has a real problem with it. And to this day, in scripture that Mormons believe in, it states that basically if Emma does not agree to practice polygamy, to allow her husband to practice polygamy, she will be destroyed. And in this interview that I had heard with Lindsay Hansen Park, I heard her say, when we're talking about the destruction that was threatened upon the lives of women in Nauvoo that were refusing to practice polygamy, when they say destruction, they are talking about blood atonement, which, for the most part, blood atonement is committed by slitting the throat.
Hmm.
But it doesn't have to be that, but in general it is, because the principle is you have to spill your own blood on the ground.
Yeah.
If somebody's committing blood atonement on you, they have to spill your blood on the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah. There are a few ways to spill more blood more quickly
Exactly.
than slitting the throat.
And more effectively.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, of course, as I am listening to all of this, thinking about Mary Smith, I'm thinking to myself, pardon the language, holy fucking hell. Like,
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
did she commit blood atonement on herself because she didn't want to practice polygamy? Because that was one of the reasons that some researchers had thought that
Mhm.
she took her own life was because of her husband had been told to practice polygamy.
Yeah.
So I had all of these little pieces, and I knew that they had talked about such things on Sunstone Mormon History podcast. I also knew that Brian worked at Benchmark Books, and so I just looked up their website and I did find an email address for him. And sometimes you do these things and you don't hear anything back.
Yeah.
I did hear something back, and not only did I hear something back, he very enthusiastically asked my permission if rather than answer my questions, they could talk about it on Sunstone Mormon History podcast. And of course I said yes, was so excited. This was about 2 months ago, and now they just released it this past week.
Mm.
It has been driving me mad to not
Hmm.
listen to it, but you and I
Hmm.
agreed we wouldn't listen until we sat down and listened to it together.
Yeah, I really hope that what we hear actually is relevant to everything that we thought and felt.
And I also hope there's more information than what we
We
had.
already have. Yeah.
Because it's an interesting story to talk about, even with just the information that we had. So if that ends up being all that they end up talking about, hey, it's going to be fascinating to other people, but we'll be a little disappointed because we're
Yeah.
hoping there's more information. But
Yeah.
we'll see. We
Yeah.
haven't listened to this at all. So, and I sought Brian Buchanan's permission, and he
Hmm.
gave us permission to play this podcast episode on
Hmm.
our podcast, and so that we can both respond to it, react to it in real time
Hmm.
as we're hearing it for the first time. So
Hmm.
neither Nate nor I have listened to this episode, and so this is brand new for both of us.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm going to press play and we're going to see how this goes.
Hi, this is Lindsay Hanson Park. And this is Brian Buchanan. Bringing you the story of Mormonism from the shadow of the everlasting hills, straight out of Zion. This isn't your grandpa's Mormon history. You people have been dropping amazing stories in our laps lately, so thanks to you, we're off on part 1 of 2 of Mailbag Adventure. Thanks to listener Susanna, we've got a real banger for you. And it requires our trusty time machine, however. And so we're going to get there. But thanks for listeners who send us cool stuff. We try to get to all of you. I know we don't get to all of you, but we really do try because we know you've got the goods. This one from Susanna is good. Let's rev up the time machine to 88 miles an hour because we're headed back to the shores of Mississippi, old swampy, the always moist city of Nauvoo. To get started, we need another time machine first. So maybe park your DeLorean and we'll use the train from Back to the Future 3 instead for this one. See what I did there, Susanna? The dude of our story, Edward Robinson, was born in Cheshire, England in 1807. So that puts him just before the Dickens era. Edward Robinson apprenticed as a footman for a royal family, driving the lords and ladies around so they can chase their foxes. There's a whole family tradition of how this introduced Edward to the fine arts and how he loved to dress nice and be out in nature. So in 1828, Edward marries the lady of our story, Mary Smith. Same kind of story with her. She pulls herself up by her bootstraps. Maybe heels of her glass slippers? Something like that. But Mary also gets on the fast track as a tutor to a royal family. She excelled at tooting. Not even close to funny. Edward transferred his footman skills to the new shiny thing on the block, the railroad. So, sing She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain to Yourself, but in a British accent. And there are lots of family stories about this. Often they describe Edward as the first conductor of the train, like ever. While that's not quite true, he was there at the beginning of the trains in England. They were doing okay financially, trying not to pay too much attention to Tiny Tim coughing over in the corner, when their own disaster hit. Brian, cover your ears. The Robinsons had already lost 2 children when a third became sick. Mary did what everyone wishes they could do in times of despair: call Brigham Young. Elder Brigham came to the rescue. He comes to their house and blessed tiny little William, and sure enough, he recovered. No big city expert, but that sounds like the actions of someone with game. Extenuating circumstances. There has to be some extenuating circumstances somewhere. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you prefer babies dying? Right then. Actually, no, first. Lindsay gets to hype Brigham some more. This is what their son William, known as Curly Bill, yes, really, had to say about his parents and Brigham Young. Quote, Brigham Young was a great man. What, that first line again? Quote, Brigham Young was a great man. My pappy Edward, told me that Elder Young blessed me when a baby and often took me on his lap. Don't do it. That was in the year of 1840 when Brigham Young came to Manchester preaching the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. As soon as my mammy heard Brigham speak, she said, she said, that man tells the truth. Wait, sorry, that one again with a straight face? That man tells the truth. And soon after, she was baptized and made a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Poor thing. The grateful parents joined up with the Mormons, and after some persuading from Mary, they left for Nauvoo. The family sailed with a group of about 150 Mormons on the Henry. And there's this great newspaper report in which the captain reported they were in a state of mutiny, basically the entire voyage, and that the leader of the Mormon group and 2 others were taken prisoner and marched ashore. As they made their way upriver from New Orleans, it keeps getting colder.
That's new information.
What?
We didn't know about that. Oh, I'm so curious now what was happening.
Yeah.
A state of mutiny on the way over.
And why were the Mormon leaders, taken captive? What did they have to do with anything?
Right.
I mean, mutiny is against the captain and the officers.
Right.
Wow.
I know.
Right.
That is not part of the information that I had.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's interesting because, we were, as we discussed it, almost exclusively using the history written by Cousin Dennis. And maybe he didn't know that piece of information.
Must not have.
Or maybe he didn't include it because it's not positive.
Well, or it's just not relevant to what he was telling.
True, and maybe the Robinsons, there's no evidence the Robinsons were involved, so there was no reason to.
Yeah.
You're right. But that's interesting.
Yeah.
And 2 others were taken prisoner and marched ashore. As they made their way upriver from New Orleans, it keeps getting colder. All the people in the Martin Company are saying, you shush. By the time they get to St. Louis, it becomes clear they're not getting any farther, so they set up shop for the winter. And there's a great journal kept by another person in their company who describes the dire poverty of these English saints. They would band together and try to survive. And this guy tells a very nice story of how the Robinsons took him in free of charge. All those frozen Brits tried to work where they could until the river opened back up. And in 1843 of April, they arrived in Nauvoo aboard the Maid of Iowa steamboat where, as was usual, hundreds of people were excitedly waiting for them. And here's where their story gets crazy. May 1843 might just be the craziest month of all. It's during May that Emma Smith consents, air quotes, to polygamy and... Oh, well, holy crap, are you okay? What? Sorry, it just looked like you sprained your fingers doing air quotes around consents. Yeah, the big air quotes. I'll power through it, I'm a warrior. Just a couple months after the Robinsons arrived in Nauvoo, Hiram Smith got up and read the plural marriage revelation to the High Council. So, $1 million question about the Robinson family is, did they hear about polygamy at that time? Their friends from England, Brigham Young and John Taylor, were certainly in on the P, and of course, by this we mean that Joseph Smith introduced the concept to them after they returned to England. Not that they made it up in England because, historical methodology and all of that. But did the Robinsons get in on the secret? Sadly, we don't really know. Their life seems to have been fairly comfortable, especially by Nauvoo standards. They had a two-story brick house there. Like we talked about, Nauvoo wasn't the idyllic city by the river that you often see portrayed. You have this constant influx of people, many of whom are not well off to begin with, coming into a city where the economy wasn't really all that great. Land speculation sometimes made it seem shinier than it was, so the fact that they're there with this nice house, that is kind of notable. And then... well, let's just let the family tell us what happened next. Quote, in the newly built Nauvoo temple, the children were sealed to Edward and Mary and were endowed for all eternity. Within the next year, 1844, the prophet and brother Hiram were martyred. Grandfather William remembers his father lifting them up to look into the coffins upon the handsome features of these noble leaders. This tragedy brought horror and unrest among the people. Grief came with even more force into the home of Edward Robinson, for 3 months later, in September 1844, his wife, more than 35 years of age, was taken in death at the birth of her 9th child. Yeah, hold up there, Robinson family historian. We've got all sorts of problems in this one paragraph. You, listener, may already be yelling about the timeline, because obviously the temple was not completed before Joseph and Hiram Smith were killed. Not even close, so that part doesn't work. But here's the larger issue, and this is where our listener Susanna came into the story. Our Mary didn't die in 1844. I mean, yes, there's a Mary Robinson that dies in Nauvoo in September of 1844, but it's a baby.
Hey, where's my trigger warning?
Well, saddle up because it's going to get even more tragic. An actual trigger warning, even. As sad as dying in childbirth would have been, the reality is even sadder. Readers of the September 3rd, 1845 issue of the Nauvoo Neighbor opened up their paper to read this. Quote, on Monday morning last, Mary Robinson, wife of Edward Robinson of the east part of the city, was found with a razor in her hand and her throat cut dead. An inquest returned a verdict that the deceased came to her death by her own hand in a state of mental aberration.
This is where the mystery begins. What is going on here? Dying by suicide in Nauvoo is very rare. I honestly couldn't think of another instance of it. So to work through this, let's start with a hypothesis from, of all people, friend of the podcast, Connell O'Donovan. Quote, it seems she had just found out that Edward wanted to take Anne Turner Wooten as a plural wife, and she killed herself out of despair. So what do we make of this suggestion?
We'll begin with what we know. Mary died in September of 1845. The Wooten family had come over from England on the same ship as the Robinsons, so they had known them for at least a few years. Anne's husband, John, died 2 weeks before Mary Robinson. The two widowed people left, Edward and Anne, were then married in February just before leaving Nauvoo. So is there anything to this idea?
The number of people in Nauvoo involved in polygamy was steadily increasing and would really take off in early 1846. Given that the Robinsons had known the Wootens for a while, that does change the probability equation. So when John died, leaving Anne with two small children in a rapidly deteriorating Nauvoo, you can see how Edward Robinson might have considered marrying Anne as a plural wife. Given the short span of time, remember just 2 weeks between John's death and Mary's, that's not a lot of time. However, if this hypothesis is actually correct, I think you could see how the sudden potential of a plural wife could rock a person's world hard and quick.
The other question raised by our listener who sent us in the story is whether this situation was actually one of what would come to be called blood atonement in Utah. If a potential plural marriage is suggested, and if Mary is resistant, could she have been, quote, sent cross lots, to use another Utah term, and it was made to look like she died by suicide? This seems like an odd way for the genteel English woman to die. Is there more to it?
Well, there are a lot of ifs in that scenario, just to be sure. First, assure everyone there is no indication Hosea Stout was strangling squirrels anywhere near the Robinsons, so we can write that off. Sorry, Lindsay.
And he would have poisoned her. That would have been his choice. She would have just gotten real sick.
He was out of poison. He'd used it all. Now, on first glance, in the absence of any evidence whatsoever, it seems like he just discarded. But remember, the 1843 polygamy revelation includes this disturbing threat to Emma, quote, but if she will not abide this commandment, she shall be destroyed, saith the Lord, for I am the Lord thy God, and will destroy her if she abide not in my law. That's fairly tough talk from the guy upstairs. Like we will talk about soon, with a certain massacre in a certain meadow in Utah, when you throw around violent rhetoric enough, people will, and this is wild, listen to it. So, where do we stand? I personally would put this scenario of Mary being killed due to resisting polygamy in the very unlikely category, without any evidence that A, Edward marrying Anne Wooten was even discussed at that point, or B, evidence that Mary was killed. It's probably too much of a leap. We tried to find more out about Mary, but we kind of ran into a wall. Their friend John Taylor doesn't mention it in his journal. Brigham Young doesn't mention it. There was that really interesting quote from the inquest in the Nauvoo Neighbor. So I asked our good buddies at the Joseph Smith Papers Project, do the coroner's inquests records, have those survived? And it doesn't seem like that they did. So we couldn't find a single other reference outside of the Nauvoo Neighbor article that talks about Mary. So listeners, if you find something, please, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, this is a murder mystery from Nauvoo that would be interesting because it does speak to later themes. If this were in Utah period, we'd be like, oh, it could be blood atonement. It's also a strange way to die by suicide. That's also, I, as a pastime, once chronicled all the suicides I could find in Utah papers. It took me a long time. This was in Utah period. It was most often poison, then gun, and then maybe something like this. So there's probably a lot more going on with this. I think it's interesting polygamy was blamed. It could go into that trope that we've talked about in our YouTube video that we did, that we basically said the trope of polygamy being such a threat to women that they would want to die. Of course that happens. We do know that polygamy made women suicidal and depressed Orson Pratt threatening to kill himself. It's not unlikely. It's just unsolved. So we'll brush our hands of.
Oh, actually, before we move on, I forgot there is one other element here. So Mary had apparently given birth a year before this. So there is the thought that perhaps this was a lingering case of postpartum depression, which is certainly a possibility.
Yeah, and that actually would probably make more sense. I do think it's weird it wasn't a bigger scandal.
This was the part what I envision is a world in which a database of every Nauvoo journal is in this database, and we could search keywords like this. So I tried far too long to find this, and I could not find anything that, again, you'd think someone would mention this.
Well, and again, I'm gonna throw a bone to people who think that the story is as reported, that it's suicide for this kind of thing. I will say that the more that I study Mormon history, you can hear it. And, how I started with Year of Polygamy to where I'm at now. I really do see our ancestors as running an organized crime ring. That's what they were doing. They were outside of the law. They were outlaws. They literally started the war with the government several times. When you think of criminal networks like that, there's a lot of shady stuff going on. There's a lot of underhanded deals. There's a lot of people that end up dying. So it could have been, I'm not saying it's not shady. It's very hard to prove with what we've got. So if anyone has stuff out there that could add some, I don't know, depth to this conversation, we would be interested, and so would Susanna, who sent this in. So let's just brush our hands and say goodbye to the Robinsons.
Oh, hold up there, Speed Racer. This is just Act 1. We've got 3 other generations of Robinsons to talk about. Turns out they have all sorts of characters sprinkled throughout the pedigree chart. There usually are.
Okay.
Well, that's super cool to hear them talk about it. But I don't think they revealed much that we didn't already know.
There were sprinklings of
Mhm.
information that I didn't know about. They mentioned that Edward Robinson and Mary Smith Robinson and their children all went to the Nauvoo temple and got sealed.
Mhm.
But now that I'm thinking about that, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm correct because I did read about Edward and his second wife Anne going to the temple.
Mhm.
So, but I never read about Edward and Mary. So perhaps they did all go to the temple together. Back then, polygamy was so part of the temple. Like now, going to the temple, you don't hear one thing about polygamy.
Yeah.
But at that time, polygamy was so much part of why the temple ceremonies even existed. So Mary must have known about it. Another thing I did not realize was that Anne Wooten's husband, John Wooten, they said he died 2 weeks before Mary did. So that I thought it was a couple months before. I didn't know the specifics.
Mhm.
I knew it was the same year. I didn't realize it was that close. So that
Yeah.
is fascinating because that really speaks to, John Wooten dies. Is Edward approached during that time and said, "Hey, you really should take Anne," or did Edward say, "Hey, maybe I should
Yeah.
take Anne"? No, he did not end up practicing polygamy in Utah later, and we kind of thought, well, maybe he learned his lesson that this is traumatic for women, and he would never
Mhm.
do that again, or like even consider it. I don't know. And he was friends with Brigham Young. He went through the Mormon Reformation when Brigham Young was telling everybody you have to practice polygamy. He still did not practice polygamy.
Yeah.
All of that's very interesting to me. But that makes it sound like, if her mental state was such that she was still struggling from postpartum depression,
Mhm.
um, it's just fascinating to me to think the fact that there were only 2 weeks between Anne's husband dying and then Mary taking her own life.
Yeah.
Oh, that feels a lot more pertinent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm a touch disappointed because I was hoping they would have more information.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my main disappointment, simply because, like, I mean, you had already uncovered almost all of that.
Yeah.
And what what more we got was just, flavor. So,
Now, what we did get, and this does help me in regard to my willingness and my ability to just like, okay, step back and just let it be what it is, because
mhm.
I went to him seeking more information. Where else should I look?
Yeah.
He named places that he looked
Hmm.
that I did not look.
Okay.
And he didn't come up with any more information.
Yeah.
That does resolve like me being like, is there something else out there? And it sounds like it doesn't look like there's any more information out there.
Yeah.
It is just as much of a mystery after doing that research as it was when we were hoping there was more research out there
Yeah.
or information out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a little anticlimax.
a little bit of a bummer, but this is about our reaction to it, right? And so
Yeah.
I appreciate their wit. I
Oh
appreciate,
yeah, yeah. It's I love how they told that story so succinctly. But yeah, I wanted a couple of reveals.
I know, me
Um,
too, me too, me
so
too. So it is what it is. Interesting, fascinating. Now, I have a feeling they're going to go on and talk about Joseph Eldridge Robinson,
mhm,
the man who post Second Manifesto polygamist who was a
mhm,
mission president during all of those years.
mhm.
Now, he said several more generations, so I'm curious if there's other stories that we don't know about that they're about to share. So I do want to finish.
Yeah, yeah.
There's 20 minutes left
Okay.
of
Hmm.
their podcast, and so we'll just see what else they say.
Hmm.
We move ahead now in the timeline to early Utah. We'll give Lindsay's heartbeat a minute to return to normal. The eldest child of Edward and Mary was Richard Smith Robinson. After a long trip to see the elephant in the goldfields, Richard first went down with John D. Lee and the boys south, and then settled in Pinto with wife Elizabeth.
As the leader of the settlement, he was in communication with the dudes in Cedar City as events at Mountain Meadows were heating up. From the John D. Lee trial records, as well as a visit from Andrew Jensen in the 1890s, we learned that Robinson passed on a message from Isaac Haight, written at the first attacks on the immigrant train were happening, to tell John D. Lee, quote, draw the Indians off and satisfy them with beef if necessary, but not to kill the immigrants. One witness puts Richard at the actual site of the massacre during this week, but it doesn't seem like he was actually involved in what was going on. And this is one of the themes of the massacre that we'll soon talk about. John D. Lee was convicted. Even today, some people see the massacre as a result of just Lee or a very small group of leaders in southern Utah. But the truth is, a whole network of guys were part of this terrible event. This guy is actually important in this Robinson, because Andrew Jensen does try to figure out for the first time, like an official record of what happens in the 1890s. He goes and he tries to talk to anyone that's involved in this. And we have records. He kept copious records. He interviewed them privately and spent many hours doing this. And so it's interesting that Robinson is involved in this, because some say that the message that he allegedly passed back and forth was part of the cover up. So it's hard to know.
So a decade after the Mountain Meadows Massacre, Richard is still living at Pinto, by now the husband of 3 wives. Because we do like to get tangenty, his first wife was Elizabeth Wooten. If you have a Hall of Fame level memory, you'll remember that Richard's father, Edward, had remarried to Anne Wooten a few months after Mary died by suicide. And yeah, there's a connection. Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne, with an E, Wooten, and John Wooten, who died 2 weeks before Mary, and that's her brother. So to recap,
That is not accurate. They missed something there.
Okay.
Elizabeth is the daughter of Anne Wooten's sister-in-law, Anne Wooten. There are two
So
Anne
they're
Wootens.
mixing the Ann Wootons.
I got the Anne Wootens mixed up. Hey, Brian and Lindsay,
Yeah.
you got
Yeah.
them mixed up, but we'll forgive you for it.
Okay.
after Mary died by suicide. And yeah, there's a connection. Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne, with an E, Wooten, and John Wooten, who died 2 weeks before Mary, and that's her brother. So to recap, Richard Robinson marries Elizabeth Wooten, who is essentially his cousin through his stepmother. The complexities of Nauvoo marriages.
Oh, and wife.
So maybe he didn't get it mixed up, but he didn't explain it very well.
Okay. Okay.
Because he is right. Anne Wooten was a step cousin. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Wooten was a step cousin.
Was a step cousin. Okay.
So I apologize.
Which is actually nothing.
Right.
But
There's no like relation, although
yeah.
we did talk about last time how for a couple of years in their early teens they did live in this, like for 3 years in Burlington, Iowa, they did live in the same house, grew up in the same house for 3 years,
Yeah.
5 years older than her, so he was gone by the time she was becoming like a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I apologize, Brian and Lindsay. You are correct. However, the explanation was a little fuzzy. I'm just telling
Yeah.
you that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Elizabeth Wooten is his stepmother's niece.
Okay.
That's how that works.
Yeah.
Let me say that again. So Elizabeth Wooten is Richard Smith Robinson's stepmother's niece.
Okay.
Oh, and wife number two, Mary Ann Eccles, was just 15 when she married Richard. She and her parents amazingly all survived the trek west as part of the Martin Company, which was in the same one that Emma Lee was in, John D. Lee's wife. But then the father dies, and just to be clear, this is how Richard's biographer frames it. Richard marries a teenager to help her and her mom. Yuck squared, y'all. The third wife is Mary Kate Eldridge. She marries Richard in 1866, but they have a son a year later, and then just a year after that, she dies of typhoid fever. Since this was the exact timeline that Mary experienced, it had to have reminded Richard of that sad time.
Their one and only child would be raised by his Eldridge grandparents, which seems only fitting since that was his middle name, Joseph Eldridge Robinson. When our listener pointed out the connection, I was more than happy because Joseph is a fascinating character, possibly the poster child of Post-Manifesto success.
So let me add a little context to what he just said. When I originally emailed Brian, I just talked about Mary Smith wanting to know if there was any chance there was any information about blood atonement in regard to how she died and what she experienced. We emailed back and forth several times. We were talking a little bit tangentially, and in one of my responses I said, "Oh, by the way, because I know you are so interested in post-manifesto polygamy," because he's mentioned that enough on the podcast, and Lindsay teases him about how interested he is in post-manifesto polygamy. So in my response, that was total tangent, right? I said, "Oh, by the way, because I know you are so interested in post-manifesto polygamy, Mary Smith Robinson's grandson is Joseph Eldridge Robinson, and he was most definitely practicing post-manifesto polygamy." And then Brian's response was, "I know all about Joseph Eldridge Robinson. I did not realize there was a connection. Thank you for pointing that out to me. This is so fun." And ever since then, he's been trying to convince me to transcribe Joseph Eldridge Robinson's journals because apparently, and he sent me the link, the church has volumes and volumes and volumes of this man's journal.
Wow.
There's a lot of information about Joseph Eldridge Robinson that most people don't quite have access to yet because it's all within these journals. Now they're public, they're on, the church's webs. Well, you do have to get permission, but it's not difficult. It's not, they just track it, who's doing what, but he told me how to do it. I do not have time.
Yeah.
I don't have time to engage in a project like that. I would love to. I think, and he was like, "Or any other family members that
Well,
you
like
might want to jump on board?"
transcribe the journals so that they're more easily accessible to everyone out on the internet?
Yes,
Is that
rather
the
than
point?
because it's a matter of people reading the old cursive,
Yeah.
and the information is available. It's not easy to read. It's
Yeah.
laborious to read that
Yeah.
old cursive. And so by transcribing it into just like typed text, it's so much
hmm
easier to read. It's so
hmm
much easier to access for
Okay.
everybody. And that's been a huge thing for Brian Buchanan is trying to get as many of these old journals transcribed and available
Yeah.
to everybody.
Yeah.
So he was really excited, asking me, "Hey, we would love to have somebody on this project." Sorry, Brian, I don't
Yeah.
have time to do
Yeah.
that. I wish I did, but I hope somebody else jumps in and does it
Sure.
because I would love to
Yeah.
learn.
Yeah.
So anyway, you and I shared Joseph Eldridge Robinson's story with you at the very end of our series as a really
hmm
hilarious
I
tangent.
remember.
Can you believe this guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I just shared just the surface level of what I was able to figure out from Family
Mhm.
Search. I am actually kind of excited about what he says because
Mm.
maybe there's more, maybe
Yeah.
there's more.
Yeah.
Oh, real quick, I think it's very interesting. Apparently there were interviews done with Richard Smith Robinson in the 1890s, which is 20 years after John D. Lee was tried.
Mhm.
So we talked about him being interviewed and being called to testify at John D. Lee's trial and something that Lindsay just said that I never put together and didn't think about is that there are plenty of historians, biographers, whatever you call the different people that consider, so the note she referred to, the letter she referred to that passed through Richard Smith Robinson's hands, was a note from Isaac Haight to John D. Lee that passed through Richard Smith Robinson's hands, telling him, call the Indians off, don't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And what Lindsay just said is that there is evidence that potentially indicates that that whole thing, the claim that that happened,
Mhm.
was part of a later cover-up rather than it
Yeah.
actually happened in real time.
Yeah.
And that verifies our suspicions.
Hmm.
He's not nearly as innocent as some of our distant relatives have tried to claim that he is.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
resolute, he was strong, he did not participate because he just
Hmm.
was wrong.
Hmm.
And our take was, we don't see the evidence for that. And
Yeah.
then Lindsay says this.
For me, it always goes back to, despite the limitations of communication at the time, Brigham Young was such a dictator. Nothing happened without his consent. And people don't appreciate how potent that that environment is, right? That things don't happen unless the people at the top say so.
Yeah.
And that's how the church has always been.
Yep.
So,
Maybe he didn't actually, maybe he didn't participate in the actual killing. Best case scenario is that the level of his innocence was marked by the fact that he helped cover it up. So
mhm.
like
Yeah,
I'm sorry, he's not innocent. So
yeah.
maybe he didn't pull the trigger on any of them, but if he
Hmm.
helped cover it up behind the scenes and he didn't do anything to stop it when he knew what was
Yeah,
happening in the moment,
yeah,
that to me does not speak of somebody who had courage.
yeah. Well, and as we mentioned before, how he kind of like after the event, he kind of goes radio silent, right?
Right,
Like he doesn't write about it. I mean, those are the actions of a person who's trying to stay off the radar.
right.
So,
And that doesn't look like somebody who's innocent.
yeah. I
Even
mean,
if his all of his guilt is around the fact that he helped cover it up, it
mhm.
still indicates where his loyalties lied
Yeah.
and where his moral compass was.
Yeah, no, I mean, and he was a town leader,
Mhm.
right? I mean, he had the respect and the ear of everybody in that town.
Yep.
If the massacre had been an event that he was appalled by, then he would have behaved very differently.
Mhm.
He would have spoken about it. He would have publicized it. He would have said like, any of the children, who survived, we will take care of you until we can find your family members back east. We will send letters. We will do everything possible, right, to try to compensate for this tragedy, for this injustice that has been done to you and your family members.
Yep.
But no, he goes quiet.
Yep.
So, I mean, again, that's like adjacent to the crime behavior.
Yeah.
That's like I was involved somehow, and so now I'm going to just
Yeah.
go quiet.
He helped move events in the direction of the massacre happening.
Mhm.
And afterwards, he helped move events in the direction of covering it up.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's
Yeah.
not hard.
Yeah.
That's it's not.
Yeah.
I love what I love what Lindsay said real quick before we started again. And I don't even remember her words, and maybe you can help me remember, but when she was referencing, she said a family biographer worded it that
Hmm.
Richard married a 15-year-old to help her
Hmm.
out.
Hmm.
What did Lindsay say? What was her word? What were
It
her
was a
words?
little two-word comment.
It was
Um,
so funny. It was like
yeah.
it was vomit worthy or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
So, Lindsay, we 100% agree.
Hmm.
Mary Ann is our direct line ancestor,
Yeah.
and I feel so protective of her. And I doubt she's later going to get to this, but Richard institutionalized Mary Ann later in life, committed her to an insane asylum,
Hmm.
and we think probably gave her syphilis,
Yeah.
which I also assume they're not going to mention because
Yeah.
that was our thing that we kind of
Yeah.
stumbled.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
feel very validated by her words.
Hmm. I don't want to get too grotesque, but 15-year-old girl,
Mhm.
and how quickly after they had sex for the first time does she start noticing symptoms of syphilis?
Right. At first, they're very flu-like and like
Hmm.
sores and things that are
Yeah.
uncomfortable. But back then, I'm sure they
Yeah.
had a lot of that. But her
Yeah.
first baby dies in 1861
Hmm.
and
How old was she at that time?
16.
She was 16.
Yep. And her first baby
Yeah.
dies. And it's
Yeah.
the same year that Richard's other baby, Emma, died from Elizabeth.
Hmm.
And we feel strongly that those four babies in a row, only one of them survived, and he later takes his own life by slitting his throat with a razor. And Lindsay just said she has gone through and tried to identify
Hmm.
suicides in Utah, which that's fascinating to me. I would
Yeah.
love to gain access to
Yeah.
that information.
Hmm.
And she even says it was not common to slit
Yeah.
your throat for suicide. Now, that's new information to me. I didn't know what the percentage was or
Hmm.
comparison, but John Wooten Robinson, who is Richard's fourth child,
Hmm.
Richard Jr. lives, Elizabeth Jr. lives. I'm saying Jr., but they didn't actually call him Jr., but their first two babies are Richard and Elizabeth, named after the two parents, Richard and
Yeah.
Elizabeth. Third one is Edward, after his father, Edward Robinson. He dies within a
Hmm.
year, no cause explained. John Wooten Robinson lives, but takes his own life around age 40 by slitting his throat with a razor. He had epilepsy. He had these awful fits, as they called them back then,
Hmm.
which is the exact same way that
Yeah.
grandmother took her life, Mary Smith, back in Nauvoo, and his symptoms are very consistent with how Mary Ann was described with her symptoms, Richard's second wife, and he institutionalized her. And then after John is born, of course, we don't, at the time the family didn't know, nobody knew that he would end up dying that way, or develop epilepsy or any of those things. But then after John, so John is baby number four, Emma, baby number five, born 1861. She is born the same year as Alice Ann, who was Mary Ann's first baby, and both of those little babies die.
Yeah.
So the fact that we think that that chunk in Elizabeth's children died of syphilis, it
Yeah.
speaks to, you talk about what symptoms. Well, maybe she herself didn't have noticeable symptoms of anything major that was wrong other than
Hmm.
those flu-like symptoms or the canker sores or the things that would have happened with her body. But again, it was back then. I'm sure a lot of that
Yeah.
happened. That's why syphilis was often referred to as the great imitator.
Yeah.
It's hard to diagnose because the first four stages look a lot like a lot of other things.
Yeah.
But you talk about what kind of symptoms was Mary Ann experiencing? Well, potentially her baby died of syphilis.
Yeah.
And then after Emma, so we're back to Elizabeth's four children that we think were affected by the syphilis. Emma dies, and then the next baby, I'm suddenly not remembering. I think it was William. The next baby
Hmm.
is William after Richard's brother, William. He also dies. And
Hmm.
they all die within about a year. 10 months, one of them, 12 months, another one, 13 months, another one. So
Hmm.
all within about a year, they all die. And that's consistent with when babies were dying of syphilis, right? And
Yeah.
that doctor in that episode of Who Do You Think You Are from Martin Freeman, again, I hope people go watch that because it is very educational. He talks about it kind of works its way out of a mother's system, but if you
Yeah.
see three, four, five, six babies dying in a row, there's almost nothing else that modern scientists, modern doctors can attribute it to other
Hmm.
than syphilis. Like that for
Yeah.
them is like syphilis. This is syphilis. If four to five,
Yeah.
three, four, five babies are dying in a row.
Yeah.
And then so Mary Ann's first baby died exactly the same time period as these babies were dying. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What was I gonna say? Oh, I was just gonna reference how Lindsay worded it. She said something about how Richard married Mary Ann to help her out.
Yeah.
And that's what the family biographer, how he stated it.
Well, and she had another almost subliminal comment there expressing her
Disgust.
disgust at
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, vomit worthy.
Well, and that's how it should be. I mean, we should stop sugarcoating this nonsense. You know, making the claim that he did it to help them out. Every historical claim that we make, we have to offer evidence for it. What is the evidence that he did it to help them out?
Yeah, it's a twisted way of telling the story to try to claim innocence of any wrongdoing. It's
Yeah.
all.
and again, moral compasses throughout time. I mean, certainly, society and culture affects your moral compass, but the fundamental moral compass hasn't changed. I mean, it's we have been humans with our minds for an extremely long period of time. And yes, especially at that time, women were considered, less human than men were, blah 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 blah, all of that. But all I have to do is make a comparison with my own life, right? I interact with a lot of young people for my job, and I interact with them in a way where they often have problems that they need to solve, right? And it never crosses my mind to offer them a solution that hinges on them doing something for me, especially something so life-altering as get married and have children.
Marriage. Yep.
Right. And then the notion that he would have looked at this, teenage girl and saw her dire straits when he could have simply supported her.
Yep.
So I'll give her help as long as she climbs into my bed.
Yes.
How is the help what people focus on when they retell this story?
Goes back to the moral compass being compromised
Hmm.
by the need to protect the institution.
Yeah. Why don't they say like, okay, no, what he offered her was a prostitution. I will help you. I will pay your bills. I will put food on your table as long as you're in my bed.
Yep.
Right? That's helping her.
Right.
So I just, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And religion really is what twists people's moral compasses.
Yep.
Okay. Rather than just basic decency and empathy for other humans being the foundation for your moral compass. No, it's protect the leadership. It's protect, God's ego. And
Yep.
yeah, it's fucking ridiculous.
It is. Yep. 100%. So I guess we're going to get into Joseph Eldridge Robinson, which for us was a very giggly matter, right? It was just
Mhm.
so funny
Hmm.
that he kept practicing polygamy. It was so audacious when
Hmm.
people were being excommunicated and like apostles had been excommunicated and
Yeah.
a mere mission president, but there was a lot of protecting that was going on. Um, and I want to be careful because the what made me giggle was just the pure audacity of it. You called him
Hmm.
a caricature, like totally yes. But
Yeah.
I I also on the flip side of that, yes, it made me laugh and I totally laughed in that other episode when I was telling you about it. But on the flip side of that, and I just want to be careful. That situation came at the expense of women being taken advantage of, and that is not a laughing matter. And so
Yeah.
I don't mean to laugh at that at all. And maybe I shouldn't even say this as an excuse. My laughter came from the absurdity of it. It is absurd, and it did make me laugh. It still kind of makes me laugh. The way that it potentially affected those women is not funny at all. So I do want.
There's a weirdly innate, undeserved comedy. And we see it just in all of the pop culture portrayals of Mormons. I mean, how many stand-up comedians have two or three jokes about Mormons and their multiple wives?
Yeah, all the
And
time.
superficially, we laugh at it,
Yeah,
right? I've told you the story about, chatting with people at work
right.
and, them commenting about some Netflix show, or whatever about Mormons and chuckling about polygamy.
Yep.
And you barely have to scratch the surface before the comedy disappears. But yet that's how people that's the reflexive reaction of people. It's like, oh, polygamy, yeah, two, three wives, ha, ha, ha. And
And
it's yeah.
I think partly that stems from the fact that on the surface, these women are agreeing to this. And so it's
Yeah,
like, oh my gosh, like that's just so
that's
weird,
weird.
funny, and
Yeah,
it's like people
absurd.
laugh at it.
Yeah.
But I know what it's like to be
Hmm.
conditioned, to be groomed
Yeah.
to make certain choices
Hmm.
when you don't understand coercive control, when you
Yeah.
don't understand that. you are taught that you will receive eternal damnation if you don't make these choices. They're not really choices.
Hmm.
You have been conditioned since birth to believe that you are nothing. You are
Hmm.
nothing unless you follow this path and you do it to prove your worth. Like women choose make
Yeah.
these choices because they think they are proving that they are good enough for God. That's why I made a lot of my choices. It is
Yeah.
unconscious. It is
Yeah.
not a conscious like it's not. It is your reality. And so you are taught that that level of self-sacrifice is worthy and good,
Yeah. Yeah.
noble. And so you continuously make those sacrifices. You sacrifice yourself, literally, to be able to live within the system. And it's not a matter of women making choices from a place of safety.
Yeah.
They're making
Yeah.
choices out of coercion and
Yeah.
fear of damnation.
Hmm.
And
No,
that
that
is their
should be,
reality.
yeah, that should be the ironic poster for Mormonism. Like, Mormonism coercing women to make choices against their self-interest since 1830,
Yeah.
right? And that really, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's so obvious, it's so clear, if you are allowed to examine it with a real human moral compass
Yeah.
and not with the twisted moral compass that they foist upon you, then it's just so easy to see.
It's clear to me now on the other side of it.
Yeah,
Inside of
yeah,
Mormonism, it was not clear.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
not what was in my brain. This is not what I was
Mhm,
thinking about,
mhm,
even as I was being taken advantage of.
yeah.
I didn't know anything else.
Mhm.
So, okay.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and press play and we'll see what else I have to say.
Were well-known brewers. In fact, and here we go, you'll see Edward cited as the first brewer. Joseph
Let me
is a
go back.
fascinating.
Have reminded Richard of that sad time.
Their one and only child would be raised by his Eldridge grandparents, which seems only fitting since that was his middle name, Joseph Eldridge Robinson. When our listener pointed out the connection, I was more than happy because Joseph is a fascinating character, possibly the poster child of Post-Manifesto success. However, before we leave the early Robinsons, one last entertaining thing. Both Edward and Richard were well-known brewers. In fact, and here we go, you'll see Edward cited as the first brewer in Utah. Once again, there's a good chance that's not quite the case, but still. Richard would be known as the beer bishop and would lead to one of the best stories I've ever heard.
I hope it leads to an actual Valley Tan recipe that we've been trying to get our hands on. If there ever exists one, we want it.
It's in this barrel. Just you see. Family lore tells how one night there's a loud noise and Elizabeth wakes up screaming that she's been shot and blood is running down her leg. The reality was that the cork had popped out of one of the barrels of beer, happily brewing in the corner, and nailed her in the leg, leaving a trail of beer down her side.
Maybe Warren Snow did it. Pulling us back out of the weeds again.
I have to pause it right there because I did read that story, but it wasn't ever anything that came to mind to share when I was talking about him being a beer bishop. So
Mhm.
I'm really glad that they shared that story because I mean, it's really comical, right? Especially because
Yeah,
Mormons aren't supposed to drink. So,
yeah,
and he was the bishop.
yeah. And did they say that that happened in their bedroom?
It must have been because she was in bed.
So they had a barrel of beer brewing in their bedroom.
I wonder if they used every space in their house that they possibly could. They would have these barrels and would be brewing beer.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just funny. But anyway,
yeah.
let me go back a little bit.
Pulling us back out of the weeds again. After a fairly normal Mormon upbringing, Joseph Robinson left for a mission to California. Joseph had married Minnie Nell in 1891, but then no plural wives. Hold that thought. He was president of one of the conferences until, out of the blue, he is called to replace the mission president. Well, only sort of out of the blue, because behind the scenes, leaders in Salt Lake had long been looking to replace the old guy for at least a year and a half. They had even sent James Talmage, just a store brand professor, not the apostle yet, to secretly spy on him in California. And Talmage reported back to the president that he was creating serious divisions, especially in San Francisco. The change was made at the April 1901 General Conference. Wonder what Joseph Robinson might have been doing in Salt Lake to prepare for his new assignment. Probably getting his wife ready to come join him?
Which one? Hey, oh, yeah, that's right. It's time for another round of polygamy fun. On April 5th, 1901, Robinson gets a telegram in California informing him that he is going to replace the mission president. He immediately hops on the train and heads for Salt Lake. 2 days later, he records in his journal, a most notable day, journeying to and from blank blank. Prayers and blessings promised, realized. You, clever listener, already know something is going on here. Sure enough, we find Joseph E. Robinson and Wilmia Brown in the record of marriages performed by Matthias Cowley. And Matty was a busy boy. This was one of at least 4 plural marriages that he performed during the week of General Conference. A very common pattern because everyone is in town. And the 2 blanks in Robinson's journal are likely for Hampton House, which is where the marriage took.
But why, after 10 years of monogamy, does Robinson suddenly marry a plural wife? Well, it probably wasn't quite that sudden, because in a life sketch that she recorded later in life, Wilmia, a weird name. Wilmia describes how, at least as early as the winter of 1899 to 1900, Joseph Robinson came to her and told her that a plural marriage might be possible. She had known him in Kanab for quite some time, and despite plenty of interest from boys her age, she said, quote, "I wanted a man wise enough to lead me, not one who had to lean on me."
Don't we all?
Gross. When Joseph left for California, he told Wilmia that Thomas Chamberlain would be his wingman in Kanab, and Chamberlain kept her updated until it was finally authorized, whatever that looked like. Given how chummy Robinson was with Joseph F. Smith down the road, it seems like a good guess that he played a part in getting the marriage green-lighted.
It was very romantic. The next day, Joseph got back on the train and returned to California, while Wilmia got to train and wagon it back to Kanab. Wait, did I say romantic? I meant pragmatic. These are very much post-manifesto days.
At least they were the first people to ride a train ever.
The first ever. Like
Ever.
No one ever before. 6 months later, it was time for reruns. On October 2nd, 1901, Joseph rides back into town and immediately goes to Mrs. Thomas and hangs out with second wife Wilmia and his wingman again. Joseph then meets up with Matthias Cowley, and they go to see the first presidency, but they're in a closed-door meeting. Robinson then meets H, and H gets a room at the Hampton House. The next day, Joseph writes in his journal, "Most of the day spent at the house, although I was out early in the morning and can record this as another underlined eventful day. Super sneaky, President. We know exactly what's up. You just married Harriet Spencer as your third wife."
Quick side note that I did not mention before, but I knew. So he just mentioned that Joseph Eldridge Robinson's third wife, her name was Harriet Spencer. Okay. Harriet Spencer is also a distant relative of ours. The Robinsons descend from our grandma Beverly.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, let me be more clear. The Robinsons are ancestors of our grandma Beverly's mother. The Spencers are ancestors of our grandma Beverly's father. One of these seasons, it will be about the Spencers, because there are 3 Spencer brothers. That Harriet Spencer descends from a fascinating story that is 100% on my list for one of our seasons, because the Spencer family there's so much there. So I'm kind of excited to talk about it, but when I saw that Spencer name, of course I had to look, and I was like, yep, she sure does. She descends from the same people we do. So that it's just kind of funny that from 2 different sides of our family, both of these people descend, or, our relatives. And again, that speaks to how everyone in early Mormonism is connected, So
I mean, yeah, the more I learn about this, the more uncomfortable I am with this seeming genetic bottleneck, and just how, yeah, Mormons they're all intertwined.
So they are, and I don't have the source in front of me, but I'll at least mention it. I have read several articles in the last 3 or 4 months about how geneticists consider descendants of early Mormonism as its own, I don't know the terms, as its own genetic group. So when somebody does, let me approach it from this angle. When we do our DNA test now, and they can track people to this part of Ireland or that part of Ireland, it is already part of the genetic studies that geneticists can track DNA. These people, eventually you can find them coming out of Ireland here, But before we get there, you can track them to the Mormon people of early Utah and then there.
Yeah.
So it is its own genetic source. Like
Yeah.
there is, and the part of one of the articles was there is a Mormon face. Now, of course, there's people that join
Mm.
Mormonism from all over the world, and that doesn't apply to them, but people that descend mostly from those early Mormons in Utah, which we do
Yeah.
exclusively, there is a Mormon face. There are features in people who descend from Mormons that are identifiable at this point. And I was like, wow, that is
Yeah.
fascinating. So, anyway, yes and yes.
Wow.
And it is, most people weren't marrying first cousins. I have some stories to tell you someday, but it almost doesn't matter because if you're like third cousins, but you descend from all the same people,
Yeah.
more than third cousins, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it is definitely a bottleneck
Yeah.
genetically through Utah. And it's pretty much exclusively us. So,
Well, and and I know that if you go deeper into history, this was exceptionally common
yes.
because everybody grew up in villages and they interbred with people in the next village or two.
Mhm.
So I know that this is no big deal. But it's still, given what we know about genetics and about how to come from genetic stock that increases your chance of not developing, particular health problems.
Yeah.
I,
Hereditary health problems.
I don't, yeah, this bottleneck is uncomfortable.
If the church was true, God would have told the prophet to be careful and make sure you do the genealogy of people
Yeah.
around you so that you are not creating a situation where you inherit certain
Yeah.
medical problems. I have some stories in my pocket that you're not gonna like hearing. Let me put it
All
that way.
right. All right. Looking forward to
That's for
that.
another time. Okay, we'll keep going. So, Joseph Eldridge Robinson just married his third wife, Harriet
Mhm.
Spencer, in
Mhm.
1901.
Which his personal journals seem to indicate that he was fully aware of the law bending that he was doing.
Oh, yes.
So,
And what Brian Buchanan says here, given his later documented relationship with the church prophet, Joseph
mhm.
F. Smith, it's not hard to conclude that Joseph F. Smith was very much involved with approving of making it possible for them to get married. At the same time, well, not exactly the same time, but within a few years, Joseph F. Smith is in Washington, D.C., testifying at the Reed Smoot hearings that, that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
He was the prophet of the church and he was outright lying.
Yeah.
And our relative Joseph Eldridge Robinson is an example of somebody whose post-manifesto polygamous marriages he was facilitating.
Yeah. And again, that is evidence that within the Mormon church, Mormons believe that they are exempt
Yeah.
from outside scrutiny, right? And it's the classic thing that religions have always done. It's that whole we follow the higher law idea, right? They have no qualms about lying, about saying the opposite of what is actually happening because they feel that they have no ethical responsibility to the people around them. That it's classic tribalism. We are the righteous,
Mhm.
and none of you have any right to get in the way of that.
Lying for the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was taught growing up that lying was a sin
Yep.
under
Yep.
any circumstance.
Yep.
So,
Pragmatism was again in the air. Harriet immediately hops on the train with the wingman and they head back home. And Joseph ends up sticking around a little longer in Salt Lake because Lorenzo Snow dies and he and second wife Wilmia attend the funeral up in Brigham City. But come on, let's get serious. What's going on here? This is 1901. A solid decade plus after the manifesto. Joseph Robinson is a mission president, one of the most visible positions in the church. So how in the world is it cool for him to marry two wives, boom, boom, like that?
The answer to this question seems to be pretty simple. It's two dudes, Joe and Matt. New church president Joseph F. Smith and relatively new apostle Matthias F. Cowley both were ardent believers in plural marriage, and not the theoretical Platonic ideal kind, the ongoing keep marrying wives right now kind. Exactly how much each of them was involved is tricky, especially Joseph F. Smith. He will increasingly be hands-off, fingers in the air, la 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 la, I can't hear you, kind of guy. Here's my take. Cowley, apparently based largely off a commission from now dead First Presidency Counselor George Q. Cannon, had it as his mission to keep polygamy alive. Follow sincere apologies to Lauren Woolley and his complete bullcrap story of the 1886 ordinations. Please, I beg of you, stay tuned for that. Matthias Cowley is the guy who keeps polygamy going.
We mentioned this, but maybe only once. In 1882, John Taylor dictates a revelation that essentially says, dudes who aren't living the higher law of polygamy have zero business presiding over anyone. It seems like if he were the guy driving the bus, Matthias Cowley would have made sure all his colleagues in the Council of the 12 were polygamous. But he wasn't. And one of his colleagues, like the president of the quorum, was Francis M. Lyman, who 100% wasn't happy about continuing polygamy and would be increasingly militant about shutting it down. So Cowley appears to have targeted mission presidents as an important echelon of church leaders who needed to man up and marry plural wives.
What is wild is that, in coming years, church leaders will gradually and quietly remove post-manifesto polygamists from positions, especially obvious ones. The Second Manifesto of 1904 becomes a bright line in the spiritual sand. Okay, some flickering. That divides authorized marriages from not. So how does Joseph Robinson, who married 2 wives very late, escape this process?
Remember the F, Brian.
Remember the F, of course.
Listen to these 2 conversations Robinson had with Joseph F. Smith, who, again, prophet. This first one happens in 1907. Quote, I talked to him about B, and he said to tell her how I felt towards her, etc., but to be careful in writing so that should it fall into strange hands, no harm could be done, and added, quote, in the hereafter we can do as we please, and these fellows who would harass us here can't help themselves. I am very thankful for his advice and most grateful for his confidence. Holy shiz, this is 1907, and he is the church president, and he tells Robinson to shoot his shot, but not just that. He's like, but don't worry, we can be extra creepy in the next life, and nobody can stop us. The Tribune's not going to be there.
Frank J. Cannon can't do anything next time around. Now,
dear God in heaven.
No, exactly.
That's why this is so good, right? Because that is such a crazy thing to write down. He's telling me not to write it down.
But polygamy ended in 1890.
To anyone that ever is a polygamy denier, we know they told people to burn things and not write it down again.
Now, however, as I recall, in public, Joseph F. Smith is not saying this.
Well, hold on. Let's talk about his wingman. So, talk to me about the wingman, because we see...
I gotta pause it for just a second and make an observation. On Family Search, there are 4 women listed as wives of Joseph Eldridge Robinson. Minnie Nell, Wilmea Brown, Harriet Spencer, and Eddie Lee. In what Lindsay just read, this conversation that they found in Joseph Eldridge Robinson's journal about a conversation he had with church president Joseph Fielding Smith in 1907, he refers to the woman he's interested in as B. That does not line up with any of the women he married.
Okay.
Any of the women that are listed on Family Search. Now, the first 3 he had children with. And that 4th one, we talked about briefly because I told you she descended from John D. Lee, Eddie Lee, E-T-T-I-E. Eddie is her name, Eddie Lee. There's no B in her name. There wasn't any information about her. There was no marriage date and no children listed, and yet she's still on the list for his wives. This makes me wonder if he had even more wives, some of which are not recorded, especially if he was marrying them in 1907. It's just fascinating. And maybe they will tell us something about this in a minute. I don't know if they'll share any more details about that, but that initial is nowhere present in what's listed on Family Search. So that just tells me that there are more women than what we know about.
Yeah.
Now, however, as I recall, in public, Joseph F. Smith is not saying this.
Well, hold on. Let's talk about his wingman. So, talk to me about the wingman, because we see when they're doing all this post-manifesto nonsense, they have proxy people doing all kinds of stuff. Men, women.
Boys.
It's not just about how like women's purity, they need to have an escort or whatever. It's like maybe that guy's the husband. If I'm a federal guy, is that the brother? Is that the sister? Is that the wife? Who's doing what? Who's living where? It's not as easy as you think, especially when we're 2, 3 generations into Mormon inbreeding. They're starting to look a little a little like each other.
Polygamists all look alike. Okay, now.
But I will say sometimes, and you know, I'm not the only one that thinks this. You've seen plural families and you're like, I can't tell who the moms and the daughters are. It's a little gross.
Okay, now the second conversation comes in 1912. And to me, nothing captures the ambiguity of post-manifesto, post-second manifesto polygamy better than this. Quote, "In evening, went down to Ocean Park and had a most splendid visit with the Smiths, and dinner as well. President Smith told me many things in confidence I much appreciate. He has befriended and protected me and Benny Rich against recommendations from the Quorum of Apostles to let us out, etc. He said, quote, "It is hard to make some people see the difference between cases, that you will permit this one, but won't or cannot that one." Said Charles W. Penrose was a little extreme in that, and he could not talk at all to Francis M. Lyman, who had been especially active in hunting down certain cases, but that he and President Lund understood one another. Brother L was wise, liberal, and broad-minded, charitable, and they got along as one. Told me of keeping papers in his hands and of holding some entirely from others, as it would do no good for them to see them and might do harm. Letter from Bountiful, anonymous, telling of my affairs and others, sent back to Joseph H. Grant, and no one else saw it. Held up forced by FLM, i.e. Francis M. Lyman, resignation of Joseph Eldridge, and returned it to President Grant. Oh, I do feel blessed with the confidence of the president as shown by this in me.
Moral of the story is that Joseph Robinson remains as president of the California Mission for a whopping 20 years until they finally released him honorably. Wait, sorry, did I say honorably? I mean, a report of the conference where he was released said he was honorably released. His services in the mission have been eminently satisfactory. Yeah, no. The reality was more complicated and gross than that because Heber J. Grant and his cousin Tony Ivins went to California to investigate some issues. First were reports that Robinson was pocketing some donations, but far more disturbing were allegations from at least 6 women that Robinson had done things ranging from lifting dresses to checking out legs to getting super handsy. And eagle-eared listeners might remember that we talked about part of this story. Ivins was wildly sneaky by recording some of the details in his journal in Spanish because that would have never been figured out. Well, if this was all true, then they probably disciplined him, right? They knew he was abusing members.
That's what we do.
They're going to take care of it. Oh, wait, we're Mormon. Nope, definitely not. We do what we always do. He gets a job with a church-owned beneficial life, and church leaders took pains to reassure people that Robinson's release was just business as usual, because it was.
Well, keep Handsy Joe in your mind for just a minute.
So that's new.
Yeah.
Not surprising, but
Yeah.
that is not information I had stumbled upon when I was sharing a brief sketch of his life to you.
Mm.
He did get an honorable release, which is what I had read.
Yeah.
But as Lindsay points out, standard, like it wasn't unheard of to get an honorable release when your behavior had not been honorable. My brain made a connection when she said that because I remember them talking about a story of Anthony Ivins, who was an apostle, how the only reason we had some information about some of the post-manifesto polygamists is because he thought he was being sneaky and he was writing information down in his journal that they didn't really want him recording. And he put it in Spanish, and like Lindsay said, as if they couldn't have figured that out.
Yeah.
But he did record it. I didn't know when I heard that episode, whenever it was that I heard them talk about that, had no idea they were talking about Joseph Eldridge Robinson, my relative. Handsy, lifting ladies' skirts.
Mhm. How old is he at this time?
I'm not exactly sure when he is being released. I want to say he was being released around 1920. So that would mean
He's how old? He's 50?
Well, he was born in 69. So let's say 70 to 20. So he's around 50 years old.
Okay, so he's around 50 years old. So he's my age. And somehow he thinks it's okay to lift women's skirts. He thinks it's okay to touch them
Without their permission.
without their permission.
Hmm.
The, the moral desiccation that has to exist in your mind
Hmm.
to think that this is okay. And
Women,
again, these are God's elect,
yep.
right? These are God's chosen. These are Saturday's warriors,
Mhm.
right? These are those saved for the last days because they were of such high moral character. He already has four, probably more women
Yep.
who have agreed to be intimate with him.
Yes.
All other moral criticisms aside, just, with that as a foundation, they have consented to be sexual with him. And he has to go out and get handsy with women who have not consented to that.
It just speaks to the long tradition in Mormonism that women are there to meet men's
Yeah.
needs. And with that understanding, why is it a problem that he's doing that? Now, it was a problem, clearly, because they were choosing to release him from the calling, but it wasn't enough of a problem for them to actually hold him accountable.
Right, right.
Just were trying to quiet the women that were complaining.
And yeah, and again, wasn't he chosen for that position by the power of the Holy Spirit? Wasn't he chosen because of their discernment? Okay, and why didn't they discern a week before he was going to start doing that he was going to start doing that? They could have stepped in and say, "Hey, we know you've been thinking about, doing some butt pinching, doing
Right.
some skirt lifting. So cut that shit out." Right? No, they had to step in only after there was enough rumors to get from California back to Utah.
And it wasn't about stopping his behavior, it was about saving the reputation of the church.
The claims that these men have, that they have supernatural Jesus powers, is ridiculous. And I mean, I find myself just getting so angry at this bullshit because these people, these men, are so convinced that they are the righteous ones, that they are the ones with the moral character, and they wreak destruction on the lives of so many people around them by the hundreds and thousands,
Yeah.
and they get off scot-free. They get what? Punished by getting a new job.
Right, which is funny because it said he worked for Beneficial Life. Now, I don't know the history of Beneficial Life when it started, but it was basically the church's insurance company.
Yeah.
And side funny story, I had a job interview with Beneficial Life when I lived in Salt Lake City.
Mm.
Who got me the interview? Our grandfather.
Mhm.
Why? Because he worked for Beneficial Life toward the end of his career.
Yeah.
So interesting. But his punishment was him getting released, but there was nothing, no punishment after the fact. He was released honorably. Everything was swept under the rug.
Yeah.
Then they got him a job elsewhere to
Yeah.
further the cover up.
Yeah. So after committing what in many cases was likely sexual assault,
Absolutely.
then his only punishment is something that benefits him.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, is that not the history of Mormonism, in a snapshot?
Yes, it is. They did not mention him moving a couple of his wives to Mexico. I don't know if they're going to mention that, if that's part of the story they're going to tell, but
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping that they would, but we'll see. There's only 5 minutes left of the episode.
Now fast forwards us to the 1960s.
Okay.
We're in the dorms at BYU, listening to the Beach Boys, and listen, I am no happier about having to be at BYU than you are. Mike Quinn, yes, that Mike Quinn, is an RA. One of the kids on his floor, Steve, comes home from class absolutely furious. He's screaming about his religion teacher. What else is new, right? Well, this professor hit too close to home. The teacher was very definite that everyone who married after the manifesto was an adulterer. That wasn't what this kid had heard growing up. He told Mike Quinn that his grandfather, a mission president, had married 2 wives after the manifesto, and it was all authorized. The family even had a recommend for one of the marriages signed by Joseph F. Smith. This was all wildly confusing to Quinn. He did his best to calm Steve down.
Wait, hold on. This Steve was Steve Robinson. Sorry, Stephen E. Robinson, creator of the crappy bicycle parable and Believing Christ. Longtime BYU professor and author, dude. The guy who said signature books was Core Horrors Press, that guy?
Yeah, one and the same.
Amazing.
The way Mike Quinn tells it, this whole thing piqued his interest enough that he went to the Genealogical Society and found family group sheets for Joseph Robinson and the 3 wives, and sure enough, this was all authorized stuff. The cognitive dissonance that he felt punching him in the grief bone sent him down the 50-year quest to figure out Post-Manifesto polygamy. Thanks, Steve. Not so much for your books per se, but thanks for lighting the fire under Mike Quinn.
I just want to say something.
Real quick, I just gotta say something, Lindsay. I know you weren't in Mormonism as long as I was, but I
Yeah.
fully know who Stephen Robinson was.
Yeah.
Especially when I was younger, in the late 90s, early 2000s, at church schools, around other Mormon kids, that name was around because like he had written this parable of the bicycle. He had written, so it was kind of like he was one of those sources of us young Mormon kids that he would produce material that was very edifying to us, and our
Yeah.
testimony would grow
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. And my brain's a little bit exploding now because at the time I had no idea that he was a distant relative, but also Mike Quinn has, he has since passed away, actually quite recently from what I
Yeah.
understand. He was one of the September 6th that was
Yep.
communicated in the
Yeah.
early 1990s, BYU, former BYU professor. He has, he was instrumental. He was a pioneer, if you will, in the modern decades of discovering and producing and releasing information to the public about the history of polygamy in Mormonism. His research, his work has been paramount for modern day Mormons, ex-Mormons
Mhm.
to understand the truth of
Yeah.
Mormon history.
Yeah.
And my brain is exploding a little bit right now, thinking that that all started with him overhearing this
Yeah.
Steve Robinson kid, who was the grandson of Joseph Eldridge Robinson,
Mhm. Mhm.
objecting to what his religion professor had said at BYU because he knew for a fact that his own grandfather had been approved to practice post-manifesto polygamy,
Mhm.
and that the family had an actual a copy of the actual recommend signed
Mhm.
by the church prophet Joseph F.
Mhm.
Smith. And it's hilarious to me now thinking back that this man who, I didn't know who Mike Quinn was when I was a
Yeah.
young man. That
Yeah. Of course not. Of course not.
completely, yeah. But I knew who Stephen Robinson was. So it's hilarious to me now that his upset about this, what he thought was inconsistent, like he felt like his grandfather was being called an adulterer and he was upset about it.
Mhm.
That is what lit the flame underneath Mike Quinn.
Yeah. Well, isn't that situation a kind of weird, like, trifecta of Mormon archetypes, right? Because you have the professor who is insisting vociferously that the Mormon Church did nothing wrong,
Right.
right? And then you have this young student who is insisting, no, the world is wrong. What the church did was right.
Hmm.
And then you have Mike Quinn as a young guy going like, wait, what we've been told isn't true? And those are like the three types of Mormons.
Right. Right. And Mike Quinn had enough integrity because now, from what I understand, he was a believer until he
Mhm.
died,
Yeah,
but he had integrity
yeah,
and he felt like the truth mattered.
yeah.
And personally, I don't know how he still made that work, but I can't criticize him at all for wanting to believe in all of that in light of the fact that he did so much
Yeah.
hard, important work to
Yeah.
tell the truth. And it wasn't
Yeah.
partial truth, it wasn't sugar-coated information. It was the truth. He got excommunicated for
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
stuff that now the church has had to admit to because
Yeah.
the internet
Yeah. Yeah.
ripped that
Yeah.
curtain aside. You're right. Those archetypes, and my brain is just exploding a little bit right now. How
Yeah. And
fascinating.
I had no idea that there was any connection between, I mean, again, considering how it seems like all Mormons are related to each other, I shouldn't be that surprised by this. But I had, heard about Michael Quinn for at least 15 years,
Right.
just in learning more about those who have existed on the periphery of Mormon acceptance.
Yep.
Um, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
And when you told me about the Robinsons, in the past several weeks, had no idea that that would affect,
Mike Quinn.
something much later, that that would be really a turning point in the life of somebody I'd heard about, but never knew, that would end up leading to just a mass of scholarship
Mhm.
that has been very influential on the lives of thousands of people.
It, it's ironic. Like
Yeah,
Stephen Robinson coming back to the dorms, flipping mad
yeah.
about this professor basically uh,
You kept telling him that his whole family history was a lie.
exactly. And Mike Quinn being curious enough, I wonder what's actually true.
Yeah, yeah,
He looks it up and discovers information that is not consistent with what he understood.
yeah,
He has the integrity to keep pursuing it. Now,
yeah.
and for those that don't know who Mike Quinn is, I just want to emphasize like he was a prominent before he got excommunicated. And he was doing work in the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
80s. So it sounds like he was at BYU in the 60s. He was, an RA at this dorm, same time
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Robinson was. And so that, 60s is when he was college, going to college and all of that. But his scholarship was all throughout the 70s, all throughout the 80s. He gets excommunicated in 1993. Um, he had a personal relationship with Spencer W. Kimball. He had a personal relationship with like the preeminent Mormon historian, Leonard Arrington.
Mm-hmm.
He had a personal relationship with very important people.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people at that time would have said he is going to rise up and replace Leonard Arrington
Yeah.
as the chair of Mormonism, as the church historian,
Mm-hmm.
because that's who he was. But he had so much integrity, he wouldn't not produce the information that he had found, and ultimately the church excommunicated him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and he really suffered financially because of it. He was never able to like find himself a good. He never was a tenured professor ever again.
Yeah.
It
Mm-hmm.
just it was a matter of luck, a matter of like finding the right university at the right time, because some of that is a matter of luck. And if people, from what I understand, if you have your full adulthood to seek that, it's much more likely you're going to find it. And he did. He found a tenured professorship at BYU. But of course, it was based upon his membership, and so when he was excommunicated, that made that professorship, you know,
Yeah.
old. And so more than 20 years into his career, he's trying to find another position at another university. He only ever found short-term teaching positions. He didn't have enough time in his like career
Mm-hmm.
to successfully land in another tenured
Well,
professorship. So it
yeah.
really hurt him in the long run
Yeah.
financially.
Well, I mean, slightly side note, but this goes to show that despite the Mormon leadership's insistence that BYU is a university on par with any other American university, and maybe this isn't even fair, but it's not. And that may not be because of the level of scholarship. The level of scholarship may be completely worthy, but it is such a fundamentalist religious school
Yep.
that other universities who operate under the kind of fundamental notion that universities must be a place where scholarship is free to be pursued in whatever direction is supported by evidence.
Yep.
Religious schools like BYU simply aren't.
You
And
might be able, go ahead.
yeah, it's not fair for individuals, of course, because they have spent years and years and years going to those schools, getting degrees from those schools. And then they exit. And of course, this happens with lots of people who get university degrees. They learn that the degree is not worth what they were promised. And that's especially true if you get a degree from one of these religious schools.
You might be able to claim that the university is on par with other universities. Say if you were studying pre-dentistry or
Yeah.
pre-med,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
but
Yeah.
not history,
Yeah.
not theology, not religion. I
Yeah.
would even say not family studies, like if you're going to be a social worker, because
Yeah.
you will not be
That's right.
trained to be open to different kinds of families.
That's right.
And I
Yeah.
was and I was trying to think of examples as you were sitting there. I would say not, and I was like, well, maybe like dance. Nope, not dance, because you can't do certain things in their dance department that other, schools you could. Not art, not so anything that Mormon doctrine bleeds into will not be the same kind of
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
If you're studying economics, maybe, yeah, maybe it's
Mhm.
the same as other universities or on par with in general with other universities, something that is not influenced by Mormon theology. And if anything, economics, like Mormonism, they want their members to be rich because then they get more money. So in a few, it probably is on par. They probably
Yeah.
do have honest, good
Yeah.
professors that are engaged in all these things, but their Mormon doctrine negatively affects so many
Mhm.
areas of study. You're right. It's not the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah. And when other academic institutions offer criticisms and say, look, the reason we don't respect your degrees is because of all of these ways in which you're not willing to actually engage the topics
Mhm.
and actually face the sophistication with which uh, you must in order to like really do quality academic work here. Well, then BYU just dismisses it as, well, they're just worldly.
Exactly. And um, that's why so many BYU graduates who end up lose their faith in graduate school at
Yeah.
another university
Yeah.
because they learn things that were kept hidden from them.
Mhm. Yeah.
They're able to think broadly
Mhm.
and deeply and consider all possibilities in a way that you're not allowed to at
Yeah.
BYU. And probably
Yeah.
they weren't aware of the ways that they weren't allowed to think broadly.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I remember, kind of having this realization. Of course, I was in university after I stopped believing in Mormonism, but I've described before how my continuous surprise in my early 20s was how much Mormonism was entirely off everyone's radar,
Mhm.
right? We had grown up believing that like the entire world was consciously against the Mormon Church.
Yeah.
Like they acted in ways where like people, moment to moment thought, I'm doing this so that I can counteract the Mormon Church. Uh, and then I was just shocked to realize nobody knew who the hell the Mormons were, right? This would have been, late 90s, early 2000s. And I think that's what a lot of, people who leave the Mormon institutions kind of have to face. It's not that the world isn't against them, it's the world doesn't even know that they're there.
Don't care.
They don't care. And so nothing that they do is done to be against the Mormon church or against the Mormon religion.
Yeah.
And to realize that these ideas that they have grown up believing are so important are utterly unimportant to the world. It really shakes your sense of importance as a Mormon.
Well, unimportant to the broader world. Yes, but they also, I think, in many cases realize that what they're being taught, say in a graduate program at a
Mhm.
different university, contradicts the messaging
Yeah.
that they experienced at BYU or
Mhm.
another church
Mhm.
school.
Yeah.
And that like is shocking to them.
Mhm.
And it's not a matter of
Yeah.
the this other university being against them. It's just they are, telling
Mhm.
facts
Mhm.
that contradict what that person had experienced their whole life. And they
Yeah.
have to either dig in and figure it out and they leave, or they dig in, figure it out, and they stay to
Mhm.
please their family. And it's lots of cognitive dissonance and a lot of
Yeah.
mental health problems that comes from that.
Yeah.
Or they deny the truth of what they're learning and stay with the church or whatever.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and an element of faith that I think is especially destructive, and that people only realize when it begins to damage their faith, not only in Mormonism, but in Christianity and other religions in general. We have this faith that the evidence is there. We're just not aware of it, but somebody's aware of it.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. And when we actually get to the point where we're like, I want to know what this evidence is.
Mhm.
I want my faith to really be grounded in something real.
Yep.
I want to know what this evidence is. And this is a powerful thought. Even after I abandoned Mormonism, I still had this kind of unconscious belief that evidence for the existence of God is out there. I just need to find it. And not realizing how much of a faith statement that is.
Yeah.
And when you actually, get down to it and look for the evidence and time after time discover there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And then realize like, oh, this isn't sinister plots to counteract the influence of faith. This is just an utter lack of evidence.
Mhm.
There's nothing there.
Yep.
And I think that's what a lot of people who come out of, religious schools, if
Mhm.
they're honest, they eventually reach that point. I've been told that there's something here,
Mhm.
and I look and look and look, and I waste years of my life looking, only to realize they were lying.
Yep.
There's never been anything here.
Yep. Absolutely. So there's just a couple more minutes.
All right.
Finish.
Interest enough that he went to the Genealogical Society and found family group sheets for Joseph Robinson and the three wives, and sure enough, this was all authorized stuff. The cognitive dissonance that he felt punching him in the grief bone sent him down the 50-year quest to figure out Post-Manifesto polygamy. Thanks, Steve. I mean, not so much for your books per se, but thanks for lighting the fire under Mike Quinn.
I just want to say something. Thanks to Susanna for sending this in. This is a crazy family history. So many fun levels of Mormon dysfunction on your bingo card that you get to cross off. So, including possible murder mystery blood atonement pre-Utah period. Dun dun dun.
And I thought I was mistaken. And I thought I heard you speak. Tell me, how do I feel? Tell me now, how should I feel? Now I stand here waiting for the Books of Mormon report. Powered by Benchmark Books. We don't have a lot in the category of readily available books on our people today. There is a biography of Richard Robinson, son of Edward and Mary, All the Lost and Lasting Places. It does a pretty good job for a family biography at getting to the complex parts. However, you do get phrases like this. Sometimes heartbreak hangs heavy in the air, like haunting strains of a minor key adagio. So, yeah. Kind of at parts reads like Orson Whitney, waxing just a little too thirsty in his biography of Grandpa Heber. But overall, the author did dig into a lot of material and pushed back at times against folklore. For example, he found the thing in the Nauvoo neighbor and was like, okay, clearly the family story about Mary is not quite the case. On Mission President Joseph E. Robinson, there's really not much at all, but stay tuned on that one. We'll see if we can change that. As for Stephen Robinson, Mike Quinn has told this story a couple times. One of the most interesting is a talk he gave in Centennial Park and then turned into an essay posted on the Sunstone website. We'll link to it. As always, you can get these and everything else in the Mormon universe at Benchmark Books. Check out Benchmark in Salt Lake or at benchmarkbooks.com.
Cool.
So hilarious that they're playing Mrs. Robinson.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that the family biography, the one that he's referring to, is by Dennis Drake,
Dennis, yeah.
our
Yeah.
distant relative, and that is the biography that we were reading from for
Mhm.
most of these episodes, other than the initial the initial episode about Mary Ann Eccles. I didn't use that biography at all, but pretty much every other one, that's where I was reading from, amongst
Yeah.
other sources.
Yeah.
When he says there's nothing much about Joseph Eldridge Robinson, but stay tuned, I think he's referring to exactly what he communicated to me, in that he has known about Joseph Eldridge Robinson for quite some time, and is keeps trying to get people, relatives like me,
Mhm.
to transcribe the diaries, because that's once the diaries are transcribed, or the journals are transcribed, then they are very available for historians to dig apart. Now, anybody that wants to focus on Joseph Eldridge Robinson, they can get access to
Yeah.
those journals. It's
Yeah.
not a problem, but they become more widely available for more scholarship, more
Yeah.
perspectives,
Yeah.
and so forth. And that is really interesting to me, to think as much information as we have, there are still people whose journals have not been transcribed, therefore are not readily available for people to read and study, that contain even more information than what's already out there about some of these historical events. This is a man that was interacting with Joseph F. Smith, the prophet of the church. This is somebody that was interacting with Matthias Cowley, probably married him to his polygamous wives.
Mm.
Matthias Cowley was one of the apostles that was excommunicated for continuing to practice polygamy. He
Yeah.
was sacrificed for the public image of the church,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
though he was one of many who were continuing to practice polygamy.
Yeah.
But he and John W. Taylor were the two apostles that were excommunicated. And so when I was telling you about Joseph Eldridge Robinson, there are apostles that were excommunicated. I can't believe that he wasn't excommunicated. Well, one of those apostles was potentially the one that was marrying him to his
Yeah.
polygamous wife. So it's just fascinating, like all the connections. So I
Yeah.
think what Brian's referring to is, stay tuned, everyone. I am trying to get these journals transcribed so that they are available, and hopefully people will write scholarship about Joseph Eldridge Robinson. So I think that's what he's
Well, and
communicating.
I certainly never realized before, because just the mythology that we were taught growing up, how it really seems like one day, uh, all of the upper church leadership, including the prophet, were completely on board with secret polygamy,
Uh-huh.
and then the next day, uh, they had decided who would be sacrificial lambs, including their right-hand people.
Yeah.
These were not distant fringe people who were still, I mean, these were people who were in the same rooms
Yep.
discussing the same directions for the church. And some of them were selected and sacrificed.
Yep.
And I mean, if that's not the behavior of like corrupt political parties, if that's not the behavior of, mafia families,
Yep.
then nothing is.
Right.
And so, again, contrary to the mythology that we were always taught, these are not good men,
No.
right? These are not men of decency. These are
No.
not men of character.
No.
These are not men who just wanted the best for their families.
Right.
These are men of deeply selfish ambition. And as we learned about Joseph Robinson,
Mhm.
these are men of quite pernicious moment-to-moment desires,
Oh, yeah.
who are creepy old dudes, who are just trying to,
Yep.
you know, meet their base pleasures
Yep.
with no concern for the well-being of the young women around them. This is grotesque stuff.
It is. And he grew up watching his own father have two wives. He did have three because his own mother had passed away.
Yeah.
But, when we talk about Mary Ann Eccles' experience being married to Richard Robinson, Joseph Eldridge Robinson would have grown up watching his father with these two wives. He would have seen the way they were treated. He
Yeah.
would have seen how they were second-class citizens. He would have
Yeah.
seen all that. And it's not just his own family. I mean, this is
Mhm.
broader Mormonism. This
Yeah.
is the water he swam in.
Hmm.
Are we surprised that he was basically sexually assaulting women
Yeah.
in California at the end, but maybe it was all throughout his time
Yeah.
as
Yeah. Hmm.
we're not surprised.
Yeah.
Surprised, like initially as he was sharing all of that, surprised. I mean, that is information I didn't have
Yeah.
before.
To learn the details.
It was like, whoa, well,
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
surprising, but
Hmm.
I didn't know that he participated in that type of thing. But the fact that he did is not surprising.
Yeah.
It was pretty typical.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with that, I think we officially come to the end of the Robinson story. I love that they talked about it. I love that they put the information out there. Like I mentioned to you before, I want as many people to know about
Yeah.
Mary Smith as possible, to know about Mary Ann Eccles as possible. They they had tragic lives, tragic ends to their lives. They they were operating under dishonest information.
Hmm.
They they were fed just a load of shit. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
say it. They I feel like they had their lives robbed from them. They didn't
Uh-uh.
they, it's not unique to Mormon at that I'm sorry,
Yeah.
women at that time period. But just as I look at them as individuals, it's just gut-wrenching, it's heartbreaking,
Yeah.
and they weren't unique, but that just because they weren't unique doesn't mean that their individual experiences shouldn't be shouldn't be appreciated, as in like not in a good way, but like appreciated, like that we should not take the time to look back and honor them and feel empathy for them in regard to what they went through.
Yeah.
They matter to me. They are the women that I come from,
Yeah.
and they had deeply disappointing and devastating lives. And they experienced trauma that I eventually inherited, that you eventually inherited. And I can't go back and fix any of it, but what I can do is learn from it and I can
Yeah.
talk about them.
Yeah.
I can talk about them. So, and of course, Lindsay Henson Park and Brian Buchanan have a much broader audience than us, even though, and I am not disappointed in them. Clearly, there was nothing more
Yeah.
that they could
Yeah.
share. I really appreciate that I know now that the information, because they would have found it, right? Like if
Yep.
there was more information,
They
they
would
would
have found
have it and
it.
they
Yeah.
would have shared it. So I'm disappointed in regards to I wish there was more, but I am glad to know whether or
Oh,
not,
yeah.
because
No,
that kind of
yes.
puts me at peace a little bit.
Hmm.
But I am so thrilled that they took the time to talk about it because, like I said, I can't change anything that my ancestors went through, my ancestral mothers went through. But I want people to know about them.
Yeah.
So the fact that they, with their broader audience, talked about Mary Smith Robinson, and then, mention Mary Ann Eccles
Hmm.
briefly, but, that's okay. We talk about her thoroughly, so, but mention Mary Ann Eccles as being, married at 15 and taken advantage of. I want people to know about them. That I can't offer them much, but I can offer them that, just to have people remember them. And that's important to me. So I'm really grateful that they took the time to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning about Joseph Robinson, uh, it's certainly enlightening, and it was I don't know, I don't want to say it was fun to learn, but it was interesting to learn. We already had the impression that he was a pretty absurd guy,
Yeah.
and to find out that he was even more so,
Yeah.
and maybe, not maybe, crosses from the absurd into the grotesque. Um, that's good to know.
Yeah. Because I want that to be known too. I
Yeah,
don't want
yeah.
Joseph Eldridge Robinson's, but I guess, legacy to
Hmm.
be, stripped of these details.
Yeah.
He did
Well,
those things, and
and yeah, it's so important that we counteract the the version of polygamous husbands that we grew up being taught,
yep,
which was that it was a heart-wrenching reluctance with which they engaged in this. And they only did it because they were prompted by the spirit that these women needed to be supported, these women needed to be helped, and that it was God's plan for bringing righteous children into the world.
yep,
And then we look at Joseph Robinson and say,
nope,
righteous plan indeed.
yep. And when I commented earlier about, I guess, holding myself accountable to the fact that I was giggling about him and that story
Mm,
in the previous episode where I shared his story with you, and that I just need to take a step back and acknowledge that I'm giggling at the story like he's a caricature, but these were real women behind the
yeah,
scenes
yeah.
suffering. At that time, earlier in today's recording, when I said that, I was thinking about the women that he married.
Mm,
And now I can add to that group of women he was not married to, that
mm,
he was harassing,
yeah, yeah,
potentially sexually assaulting.
yeah.
And so it is not funny.
Hmm.
And in fact, if I had known this detail when I was telling you before, I feel confident in saying I wouldn't have been laughing.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
this would have been so heavy with me that I would have been like, this is who he was, and then this happened. Like, my giggling came from a completely different perspective than what I now have. Thank you very much, Brian and Lindsay, for adding that information. This is very serious.
Mm,
He was a predatory man.
yeah. Well, I remember I didn't mention it before. I remember when you were first telling me, previously about this, and there was a kind of comedic absurdity about him, and it even crossed my mind that this would make a really excellent Coen Brothers movie,
Right, like a
right?
comedy, right?
Right. The off the wall weird
Mhm.
comedy of this absurd guy who he might be just so kind of charming and amicable that despite how absurd he is, he's kind of enjoyable to learn about and enjoyable to watch, and right, like a ridiculous comedy of errors.
Right,
But learning, who he was when he got, punished with a reward.
right.
Uh,
It suddenly
yeah,
doesn't feel like a
it's not a
laughable.
Coen Brothers movie, right? Now it's I don't know, it's something else.
Now, now it's all too familiar,
Yeah, yeah,
all too consistent.
yeah. No, it starts to feel much more like
Oh,
Spotlight or,
yep. He was just like the others.
yeah,
Yeah. And you can take it all the way back to Joseph Smith and the way that
yeah,
he behaved toward young women.
no,
This is the Mormon story.
yeah.
Sorry, anybody listening that offends.
Hmm.
Please read scholarship and you will see that what
Yeah.
I just said was true.
Hmm.
The Mormon story is men taking advantage
Yeah.
of vulnerable women.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm again reminded of how useless the word true has become
Mm.
because Mormons can look at all of these historical facts, evidence for things that happened in reality. They happened in time between humans who existed.
Yeah.
They run directly counter to the image that the church wants them to have. And yet they can say things like, I know all of the historical evidence, but the church is still true. What use is the word true?
Yep. Or I know that people are saying these things and they feel like they have evidence, but it must not be true
Mhm.
because it's
Because
because the church is
the
true.
church
So
is
all of
true.
that can't possibly be true, and Satan is just stirring people up to misinterpret historical
Yeah.
information. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the word true basically becomes whatever I want to be real.
Mhm.
That's what true is.
Yeah. And I wish that that was, I mean, I don't like that that's an element of Mormonism, but looking at the world today, I wish that was only something that was bad about Mormonism. It is
Yeah.
so true to our broader world right now, and it is devastating.
Yeah.
Like it's
Well,
a
and yeah, I hear in the past 10 years, past 15 years, I've heard people lament one of the many negative, and I'm not an internet disparager. I think the internet has done great things for our world. But one of the laments about the internet is that it's created this post-truth world.
yeah,
And I hear that and I think you need to learn about Mormonism because Mormonism was doing post-truth
yeah,
150 years ago.
yeah. I do think that it's been happening all throughout history. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the history is written by the victors,
Yeah.
right?
Sure. Yeah.
So that's always been happening, but it's so much easier for people to do it now and convince large groups of people of things that aren't true
Yeah.
because of the internet. Now,
Yeah.
the internet also allows people to counteract it.
Yeah.
So I do think it offers, that good and bad element.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a problem and
Mhm.
evidence matters.
Yeah.
And evidence matters more than feelings do.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I'm thrilled that they
Mhm.
finally put that out and that we were able to
Yeah.
listen. Thank you.
Very enjoyable episode.
I know, and thank you to Brian and Lindsay for doing that research and putting all of that together. We did learn new details.
Mhm.
And with that, at some point in the near future, we'll jump on and start recording about another family story,
Mhm.
again, with the intention of discovering incidences of trauma in our family history
Yeah.
and talk about the ways in which trauma has been passed down in our family.
Mhm.
I guess I'm assuming that we're not unique compared to other Mormons.
I'm sure.
I don't know other Mormons' family histories like I know ours.
Mhm.
But I can say that when it comes to family history stories that have very obvious signs of severe trauma, we almost have endless content,
Yeah.
and
Ugh.
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking, but it's important to me to talk about
Yeah.
these things. So
Mhm.
we'll have many more stories coming in the future, but and we're not quite ready to start recording again because I'm still in post-production from the Robinson story. But when they
Right.
posted this, I was like, "Ooh, we have to take a minute and record our reactions in order to tag this onto the very end of this series." And again, thank you very much to Sunstone Mormon History Podcast and Brian and Lindsay for doing the research and putting that episode together and putting that information out there. I love that more people know about Mary Smith and
Mhm.
Marian Eccles now. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, with that, thank you as always for recording
Thank
with
you.
me.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
I know, so much fun. So we will just touch base soon with a brand new family history story and start down another rabbit hole.
Yeah. Until then.
Until then, okay, love you.
All right. Love you. Bye bye.